Clara Whitmore stepped down from the stagecoach, and the first words that reached her were the ones that broke her. He married someone else. 3 weeks ago. The man didn't even lower his eyes when he said it. 2,000 miles she had traveled, clutching a bundle of letters that promised her a home, a husband, a life of her own. And now she stood in the dust of Silver Creek, while strangers watched her come apart. She had not been rejected. She had been replaced like a coat gone out of fashion. And then from somewhere behind her, a low voice said the words no one in that street expected to hear. That man left you standing here. Chapter. Before we go on, my friends, if this story reaches your heart the way I hope it will, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. And do me one small favor, leave a comment telling me the name of the town or the city where you're watching from tonight. I love to see just how far these stories travel from one lonely porch light to another. Now let me tell you what happened to Clara Whitmore in the town of Silver Creek. The wind came down off the mountains that morning, and it carried nothing kind. Clara had felt it the moment the stagecoach crested the last rise, and Silver Creek came into view. A thin scatter of buildings clinging to the edge of the world, smaller than she'd let herself imagine through all those long months of dreaming. She had pressed her gloved hand against the window frame and told herself it didn't matter. A small town could still hold a big life. That was what her mother used to say, back when there was still a mother to say it. She had rehearsed the moment 100 times. Henry would be waiting. He would take off his hat. He would say her name the way it was written in the letters, "My dear Clara," and everything that had ached in her for 23 years would finally settle. Instead, there was a man she had never seen. A lean man in a gray vest with a watch chain and a mouth that had already made up its mind about her. "Are you Miss Whitmore?" he'd asked before her boots had even touched the ground. "I am." Her heart had lifted, foolish and hopeful. "Are you here for Mr. Caldwell?" "I manage his affairs." He glanced past her at the other passengers climbing down, as though she were a piece of freight he'd been sent to sign for. "Mr. Caldwell sends his regrets." Regrets. That single word had turned the whole street cold. His regrets. Clara heard her own voice thin out. "I don't understand. We're to be married. He wrote to me. He sent for me. Circumstances changed." The man's tone never lifted, never fell. "Mr. Caldwell married Miss Eleanor Vance 3 weeks past. Fine family. Land adjoining his own. It's a good match for the both of them." The words landed one at a time, each one a small stone dropping into deep water. 3 weeks, Clara repeated. "About that. I left Philadelphia 5 weeks ago. Then I expect you were already on the road when it happened." He said it as if that ought to be some comfort to her, as if the timing were a mercy. "Mr. Caldwell wished me to convey that he'll cover the cost of your return passage east. That's more than most men would do." And there it was, the whole shape of it. She had crossed a continent to be sent back. Clara stood very still. She was aware in the way a person becomes aware of things at the worst moments of everything at once. Of the dust settling on her hem. Of a woman across the street who had stopped sweeping her porch to watch. Of 2 men outside the mercantile who had turned to look and were not turning away. Of the driver behind her lifting down her single battered trunk and setting it in the road like he wasn't sure it belonged to anyone anymore. She had the sudden sickening understanding that she had become in the space of 1 minute the most interesting thing to happen in Silver Creek in months. And not for any reason she would have chosen. "There must be a mistake," she said, and hated how small it sounded. "No mistake, ma'am. He wrote to me." She heard the crack in it now and could not stop it. "Every month, for nearly a year. He told me about the house. He told me about the porch that faced the sunrise. He said he wanted a wife who could read to him in the evenings because his eyes tired at night." You don't invent a man's tired eyes. Something flickered across the manager's face, not quite shame, but a cousin to it. "Mr. Caldwell is a thorough man," he said carefully. "He likes to have his affairs arranged well ahead." And in those words, though she did not fully grasp them yet, was the first thread of a truth that would take her weeks to unravel. arranged well ahead, as though she had been one arrangement among several, as though there had been others. "I have nowhere to go," Clara said. It wasn't a plea. She was too proud even then to make it a plea. It was simply the fact of the matter spoken aloud because someone ought to hear it before she had to decide what to do with it. "There's a boarding house," the manager offered. "Widow Halloran, clean rooms. She'll want payment, of course. I have $4. He didn't answer that. He touched the brim of his hat, the smallest possible courtesy a man could pay a woman, and he turned to go. "Wait." Clara's voice found an edge she didn't know she still owned. "What is your name?" He paused. "Does it matter, ma'am?" "It matters to me. When I tell this story, and I will tell it, I'd like to know the name of the man who was sent to do it." For a moment, he only looked at her. Then quietly, "Pruitt. Samuel Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt." She lifted her chin, though her whole body wanted to fold. "Tell Mr. Caldwell, I hope his new wife reads to him in the evenings. I hope she's kind about his tired eyes, and I hope someday he remembers there was a woman who would have loved him for them, and that he threw her away in the street like she was nothing." Pruitt said nothing. He walked away. And that should have been the end of it. A woman alone robbed of a future $4 in her purse an entire town, watching her drown on dry land. That was when the voice came from behind her. "That man left you standing here." She turned. He was not what she expected, though. By then she had stopped expecting anything. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, in the way of a man who worked with a few days of dust on his coat and a hat pushed back off a sun-browned forehead. Older than Henry's letters, had made Henry sound into his 30s with lines already settling at the corners of his eyes. He was not handsome in the way the storybooks meant it. He was handsome in a way that took a second look, the way a solid house is handsome after you've lived in a beautiful one that leaked. He was looking at her, and here was the thing that struck her, the thing she would remember all the rest of her life. He was looking at her like she was a person, not a spectacle, not a mistake, not freight left in the road. "I'm sorry," Clara said automatically, because she had been raised to apologize for taking up space. "I know you." "No, ma'am, you don't." He didn't come closer. He kept a careful distance, the distance a man keeps when he understands a woman has just had her whole life pulled out from under her, and the last thing she needs is another man crowding in. "Name's Ethan Walker. I run a place out past the North Ridge, Red Valley." "Clara Whitmore." "I heard." His jaw tightened. "Whole street heard. That was the point I expect." She didn't understand that yet either. The point? Man like Caldwell doesn't send his manager down to the stage in the middle of the day by accident, Ethan said. He could have had you met quiet, could have had a note left at the boarding house. He wanted it done where folks would see, so there'd be no question whose choice it was. He said it flatly, but there was a low anger running underneath it, banked like coals. He wanted the town to watch him, not want you. That way nobody wonders if maybe you were the one who walked away. Clara felt something turn over in her chest. It was awful, and it was true. She could feel that it was true, and no one had said it out loud until this stranger. "Why would he do that?" she whispered. "Because he's the kind of man who'd rather be cruel in public than uncertain in private." Ethan's mouth was a hard line. "I've done business with Henry Caldwell. Once. I don't do it twice." The woman across the street had come down off her porch. Others were drifting closer now, the way people do around wreckage, near enough to see, not near enough to help. Clara felt their eyes like heat. "I should find the boarding house," she said, because motion was the only dignity left to her, and she bent to take hold of her trunk. It was heavier than she remembered, everything she owned in the world, and it still barely filled it. She got one handle up, and the weight of it dragged her sideways, and for one terrible second, she thought she was going to fall right there in the street with the whole town watching. And that not Henry, not the shame, not the $4, that was the thing that finally put the sting of tears behind her eyes. And then the weight lifted. Ethan had crossed the distance in 3 strides and taken the other handle, and he lifted like it was nothing, and he said quiet enough that only she could hear it. "Don't give them the satisfaction of watching you drop it. You hold your head up, Miss Whitmore. We'll carry it together." She looked at him, and something in her, some frozen, terrified, humiliated thing, thawed just enough to keep standing. "All right," she said. Widow Halloran's boarding house sat at the end of the street, a narrow two-story building with a swept porch and lace at the windows that had gone the color of weak tea. The widow herself was a small, sharp woman with white hair pinned tight and eyes that missed nothing. She missed nothing now. "So you're the one," she said before Clara had gotten fully through the door. Not unkind, just direct the way old women get when they've stopped having time to waste. "The Caldwell bride." "I'm not anyone's bride," Clara said. "No, I don't suppose you are." The widow's eyes went to Ethan, who had set the trunk down inside the door and stepped back hat in hand. "Ethan Walker, you bringing me business now?" "Bringing you a guest, Mrs. Halloran. Miss Whitmore's had a hard day." "Hard day." The widow snorted softly. "I've buried 3 husbands, and a hard day is a walk in the churchyard by comparison. But I take your meaning." She turned to Clara, and her voice gentled by a degree which from a woman like that was the same as another person weeping. "You have money, child." $4. "That'll buy you 3 nights and your suppers. After that we'll have a different conversation." She held out a spotted hand. $2 now. Clara counted the coins out into the widow's palm, with fingers that had begun only now to shake, now that she was somewhere with a roof, now that the street and its eyes were behind her. The shaking she'd held off all this time finally came for her. The widow saw it. Of course she saw it. She saw everything. "Ethan Walker," she said without looking away from Clara. "You've done your Christian duty, and now you can go on home before folks start writing you into this girl's story worse than they already will." Ethan hesitated at the door. And Clara, she didn't know why she did it, except that he was the only person in this entire town who had looked at her like she mattered. Clara said, "Thank you, for the trunk, for the other thing, what you said." He turned his hat once in his hands. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I've had a few days in my life where I thought the ground had gone out from under me for good. Every one of them I was wrong. It just felt like the end." He put his hat on. "This is one of your days. It isn't the end. That's all I came over to tell you." Then he was gone, and the door swung shut, and Clara stood in the front room of a stranger's boarding house with $2 gone, and her whole future gone with it. And she thought that she had never in her life heard anything she needed more than that. She didn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed in the narrow room, and she watched the square of window go from black to gray to the pale gold of a Montana morning. And she turned it over and over in her mind. Every letter, every promise, every careful line of Henry Caldwell's handwriting. A porch that faces the sunrise. A wife who could read to him in the evenings. His tired eyes. Had any of it been real? Or had he sat at some fine desk somewhere and written the exact words he calculated would make a poor girl from Philadelphia sell everything she had and cross a continent for him? And if he'd done that, why? Not for love. He'd married Eleanor Vance 3 weeks ago, not because he needed a wife. He'd had his pick. Arranged well ahead, Pruitt had said. He likes to have his affairs arranged well ahead. She didn't understand it yet. But lying there in the dark, Clara made herself a promise, and it was the first promise she'd made to herself, and not to some man, in a long, long time. I am going to understand it. Before I leave this place. If I leave this place, I am going to understand exactly what was done to me, and why. Because a woman who doesn't understand how she was fooled can be fooled again. And I am done being fooled. It was a small, hard, cold little promise. It would end up saving her life. Morning brought the town, and the town brought its opinions. She learned quickly how a place like Silver Creek worked. By breakfast, the whole town knew. By mid-morning, they had decided what to feel about it. And what they had decided, Clara realized, as she walked the short main street looking for any kind of honest work, was that she was to be pitied, which sounds like kindness, and is very often its opposite. "You poor thing," said the woman at the mercantile, not looking up from her ledger. "Coming all this way. Well, that's mail order for you." My mother always said a woman who has to advertise for a husband. She let it trail off, which was worse than finishing it. I didn't advertise, Clara said quietly. He wrote to me, through the church society. The woman finally looked up, and her eyes were not cruel, but they were comfortable in their judgment, and that was somehow harder to bear. Well, it's a shame. You seem a nice enough girl. Is there anything you're needing? Work. Clara wanted to say, dignity, a single person in this town to look at me the way that cowboy did. No, she said. Thank you. She went out. And she made herself walk slowly, spine straight, because Ethan Walker's words were still in her ears. Don't give them the satisfaction, and she found that a stranger's steadiness borrowed for a day could hold a person up when their own had run out. It was outside the church that she heard the two women talking, and it was there that the day found its knife. They didn't see her. She had stopped in the shadow of the doorway to catch her breath and gather herself, and their voices carried around the corner easy and unhurried. The voices of women who had no idea they were about to be overheard and would not have much cared if they had. The Caldwell business. Yes. Terrible. Terrible for her. Convenient for him. That's the second one, you know. Clara went still. The second. Well, there was that girl 2 years back. Came out from Ohio. Same arrangement letters, promises the lot. And then Henry Caldwell's circumstances changed and off she went. Nobody ever heard what became of her. A pause and a low, knowing laugh that turned Clara's stomach. Some men just like to be wanted, Delia. They like to know a woman would come running from 1,000 miles off. Doesn't mean they've got any intention of catching her when she gets here. You don't think he plans it. I think Henry Caldwell has never in his life done a thing he didn't plan. I think he sends for a bride whenever it suits his vanity, and he sends her home again the moment a better offer comes along. I think this poor creature yesterday was never anything but a placeholder, something to keep his pride warm until Eleanor Vance's father came round to the marriage. A placeholder, a replacement in reverse. Clara stood in the church doorway and felt the entire ground of the last year of her life tilt beneath her. She had not been jilted. Being jilted is a thing that happens to you, a piece of bad luck, a change of heart. This was not that. This had been done to her deliberately by a man who had chosen her precisely because she was poor and far away, and desperate enough to come, a man who had known from the first letter that he would never marry her, and had strung out the promises for a year anyway, because her hope had been useful to him. Her love had been a thing he kept on a shelf, to be admired at his leisure, and thrown out when he was done. She thought she might be sick. She braced one hand against the doorframe, and then something else came up through the sickness, something she didn't recognize at first, because she had not felt it in so long. Anger. Clean, hot, clarifying anger, the kind that burns off shame the way sun burns off fog. 2 years back. A girl from Ohio. Nobody ever heard what became of her. Something had happened to that girl. Some other Clara, alone in a strange town with a handful of coins and nowhere to go, had been left standing in this same street. And she had vanished, and the town had shrugged, and Henry Caldwell had gone right on being the finest gentleman in the county. Not this time, Clara thought. Not with me. She stepped out of the church doorway into the light. The two women turned, saw her, and had the grace at least to go pale. Miss Whitmore," one of them stammered. "We didn't, that is—" "The girl from Ohio," Clara said. Her voice was perfectly steady, and the steadiness frightened them more than tears would have. "What was her name?" The women looked at each other. I don't rightly recall," said the first. "Then recall it," Clara said. "Ask whoever told you. Ask your husbands. Ask the church society. Because I intend to find out, and I would rather hear it from a neighbor than dig it out of a stranger." She let that sit. "A woman disappeared out of this town, and not one of you thought it was worth remembering her name. I'll thank you to remember it now." She walked away from them with her head high, and behind her for the first time, the two women were silent, not out of pity, but out of something closer to respect and a little bit of fear, which in a town like Silver Creek were often the very same thing. Tay. She found Ethan Walker at the livery that afternoon, checking the shoe of a big bay horse, and she walked straight up to him and said, before her nerve could fail, "You said you'd done business with Henry Caldwell once, and you never did it twice. Why?" Ethan straightened slowly. He set the horse's hoof down, ran a hand along its flank to settle it, and looked at her for a long moment. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've just learned I'm not the first woman he sent for and sent home. There was a girl from Ohio, 2 years ago, and I want to know if the man who ruined me is a fool or a monster because I've decided I'm going to fight him, and I need to know which kind of enemy I've got." Something changed in Ethan's face when she said, "I'm going to fight him." Something that might, in a lesser moment, have been the beginning of a smile. "You've decided to fight him," he repeated. "I have. With $4 and no roof past tomorrow night. With whatever I've got." Her chin came up. "You can laugh if you want. Everyone else in this town has spent a day feeling sorry for me, and I have found it does not agree with me at all." Ethan didn't laugh. Instead, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "The business I did with Caldwell was over water. 2 years back, about the same time as your girl from Ohio, come to think of it, Caldwell tried to buy the North Creek off me, the one that runs through Red Valley before it feeds down into the flats. Offered me a fair price on paper, but I read the contract close, and there was a clause buried in it deep where a hurried man wouldn't look that gave him rights to shut the water off downstream. Not just my water, everybody's water. Half the small ranches in this valley drink from that creek." His jaw worked. He wasn't buying a creek, he was buying a chokehold. I told him no. He didn't take it kindly. Told me I'd regret it. And a man like that— Ethan met her eyes. "A man like that doesn't forget. He waits." Clara absorbed this. "So he's a monster," she said. "The calculating kind." "He's the worst kind," Ethan agreed. "The kind that's patient." They stood there in the dim of the livery, the horse shifting its weight, dust hanging gold in the light from the open door. "Miss Whitmore," Ethan said finally, "I'm going to say a thing, and I want you to hear it plain, with no charm in it, because you've had a gut full of charming men, and I won't add to the pile." He set down the hoof-pick. "I don't need a wife to keep my house. I've kept it fine on my own, or fine enough. But I've got a ranch that's slipping through my fingers because I can run cattle in my sleep, and I can't make the numbers add up to save my life. My father kept the books before he passed. I never learned it. And every season I fall a little further behind, and I've got maybe one more bad winter before Red Valley belongs to the bank, or to a man like Caldwell, who'd love nothing better than to swallow it whole and get his hands on my creek at last." He picked his words carefully, a man laying stones across a stream. "You just stood in the middle of this town and told 2 of the biggest gossips in the county that you were going to find a missing girl's name. That took a spine most folks around here haven't got. And back at the boarding house, Mrs. Halloran let it slip you'd kept books for your father's shop in Philadelphia before it went under. Is that true?" Clara blinked. "It's true. How did you—" "Small town. Everything's true, and everybody knows it by supper." A ghost of that near smile again. "So here's my offer, and it's only an offer, and you can say no, and I'll still cover your board till you're on your feet, no strings on it. I need someone who can read a ledger. You need work, and a reason to stay in this county long enough to make Henry Caldwell sorry. Come out to Red Valley. Look at my books. Tell me if there's a ranch left to save. I'll pay you fair, and I'll pay you in your own name, not as anybody's wife or anybody's ward, just as a woman doing work she's good at." Clara stared at him. In one day she had been discarded by one man and offered respect by another. Not rescue, not pity, but work and a wage and her own name on it. And she found that the second was so much rarer and so much dearer than the first that she didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. "Why?" she managed. "Why would you do this for a woman you met yesterday?" And Ethan Walker looked at her, and he told her the truth, which was a thing she would come to learn he almost always did. "Because yesterday I watched a whole town decide you were nothing. And I've got a low opinion of towns that decide things all at once. Usually means they're wrong. He picked his hat up off the rail. And because 2 years ago, a girl came out to this valley with nobody in her corner, and every one of us shrugged and let her disappear. I've thought about that girl more than I care to say. I don't intend to shrug twice. The livery was very quiet. "When do I start?" Clara said. Bahia. She should have felt afraid. Riding out of Silver Creek the next morning, in the seat of Ethan Walker's wagon, everything she owned in the trunk behind her, bound for a ranch she'd never seen, owned by a man she'd known for 2 days. A wiser woman, a more careful woman, might have felt afraid. But Clara had spent a year being careful and hopeful and obedient to a dream, and it had ended with her weeping in the dust while a town watched. She had nothing left to lose that she hadn't already lost. And so instead of fear, she felt something she had almost forgotten the taste of. She felt purpose. "Mr. Walker," she said, as the town fell away behind them, and the country opened up wide and grass gold before them. "I want to say something, and then I don't intend to say it again, so I'd ask you to remember it." "All right. I am not coming out here to be saved. I've been saved before. It turned out to be the opposite. So, if there is any part of you, any part at all, that thinks he's rescuing a poor jilted girl and setting her up nice, I'd rather you turned this wagon around right now and left me on the road." Ethan was quiet a moment. The harness creaked. The horse's hooves fell soft in the dust. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't think I'm rescuing anybody, truth be told." And here the corner of his mouth did finally curve just slightly. Just enough. "I think it's a good deal likelier that you're about to rescue me. My ranch anyhow. I've seen the way you count. You counted those $4 into Mrs. Halloran's hand quicker than I could have, and you counted my character even quicker than that standing in the street. A woman who counts like that is exactly what Red Valley's been missing." Clara looked out at the country going by. Somewhere behind her, in a fine house with a porch that faced the sunrise, Henry Caldwell was sitting down to breakfast with a wife he'd bought and a conscience that had never once troubled him. A man who thought he had thrown Clara Whitmore away, disposed of her as cleanly as the girl from Ohio before her another loose end, tidied another useful hope, used up and discarded. He had no idea. He had no idea that instead of vanishing, she had found the one man in the whole county who knew what he was, knew about the water, knew about the patience, knew about the trick with the contract. He had no idea that the poor jilted girl he'd left in the street had ridden out that very morning toward the one piece of land he wanted more than anything on this earth. He had no idea that she had made a cold, hard promise to herself in a boarding house bed, and that she meant to keep it. He had thrown away a woman who counted things, and Clara Whitmore had already begun to count. The wagon crested the last low rise, and there below them lay Red Valley, the creek running silver through the middle of it. The cattle scattered dark across the green, the ranch house small and weathered and standing, and beyond it, the whole wide country rolling away to the mountains. Ethan drew up the horses. He didn't say anything grand. He just looked at it the way a man looks at the thing he loves and is afraid of losing. Then he looked at Clara. "Well, Miss Whitmore," he said, "there it is. Everything I've got, and half of it owed to the bank. You still want to see those books?" Clara Whitmore, who 48 hours ago had been a bride. Nobody wanted replaced and discarded and left for the town to gawk at, sat up straight in the wagon seat. And for the first time since Philadelphia, she felt the shape of her own life come back into her hands. "Yes," she said, "take me down. I've got work to do." The books were worse than she'd imagined, and Clara didn't lie to him about it. She sat at the kitchen table with 3 years of ledgers spread out in front of her, a lamp burning down at her elbow, though the sun was still up, and she went through Red Valley's ruin, one line at a time. Ethan stood in the doorway with his coffee going cold in his hand, and he watched her count, and he didn't ask. That was the thing about him she was already learning. He didn't hover, and he didn't rush, and he didn't fill up a silence with noise the way Henry's letters always had. "Well," he said when she finally set down the pen, "you want it kind, or you want it true?" "I've had a belly full of kind this week. Give me true." Clara pushed the ledger toward him. "You're not losing money, Mr. Walker. You're being robbed." He set his cup down slow. Say that again. Your cattle sell high, your feed bills are low, your land's good, and your herd's healthy. On the numbers you're running, this ranch should be turning a profit, not a fortune, but enough to keep the bank quiet and put a little by. She tapped the column with one finger. But it isn't. Because every quarter right here there's money going out to a name I don't recognize. Hollis Freight and Supply. You're paying them near a third of everything you earn. Hollis. Ethan frowned. That's the outfit hauls my beef to the railhead. Everybody in the valley uses them. Only outfit for 40 miles. And how much do they charge you? Whatever the rate is, I never... He stopped, and Clara watched the understanding come over his face, slow and terrible, the way it had come over her own in the church doorway. I never checked it against anybody. There's nobody to check it against. Hollis is the only game there is. And who owns Hollis Freight and Supply? Ethan didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had gone flat and cold. I don't know. Some company out of Helena bought it out 3-4 years back. Nobody ever sees the owner. Clara had already done the arithmetic. She'd done it twice because the first time she hadn't believed it. Mr. Walker, she said, I've kept books for 8 years. I've seen men cheated by weather and cheated by luck and cheated by their own bad habits. But I have never once seen an honest freight company charge a rate that goes up the same season a rancher's beef prices go down. That's not a rate. That's a hand around your throat that squeezes when you can least stand it. She looked up at him. Somebody bought the only road out of this valley, and I'd bet you my $4 I know exactly who. The name hung in the air between them unspoken, and neither of them had to say it. Ethan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down hard like his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years I've been scraping and selling off breeding stock and telling myself I was just a poor manager. 3 years I've laid awake doing sums and coming up short and blaming myself. His hand closed slowly into a fist on the tabletop. And the whole time he had his fingers in my pocket, bleeding me. Slow enough I'd never notice. Patient. He looked up at her, and there was something raw in it. You said it yourself at the livery. The worst kind. The kind that waits. I did. You found it in one afternoon. I found it because I was looking, Clara said. You weren't looking because you had no reason to think a neighbor would do that to you. That's not a failing, Mr. Walker. That's just decency. A decent man doesn't go around expecting a chokehold in every contract. A small, hard smile touched her mouth. Lucky for you, I stopped being decent about 3 days ago. And Ethan Walker, for the first time since she'd met him, laughed. It came out of him surprised, like it had been a long while since he'd had the use of it. Miss Whitmore, he said, I believe you might be the best thing that's happened to this ranch in a decade. I haven't fixed anything yet. No, but you saw it. That's more than I managed in 3 years. He stood restless now, energized. A man who'd been fighting in the dark suddenly handed a lamp. So, what do we do about it? Clara closed the ledger. We do nothing, she said. Yet. Nothing. If we stop paying Hollis, we can't move our cattle and we go under before the snow. If we confront Caldwell, he knows we've found him out. And a patient man who knows he's been discovered stops being patient. She folded her hands. No, we keep paying. We keep smiling. And quietly, very quietly, we find another way to get your beef to the railhead. A way that doesn't run through his road. Then and only then, when we don't need him anymore, we let him find out we ever knew. She met his eyes. You want to hurt a man like Henry Caldwell, Mr. Walker? You don't do it in a fair fight. You do it by taking away the thing he thought he had you by, and you make sure he doesn't see it coming until it's already gone. Ethan stared at her across the lamplight for a long moment. Remind me, he said slowly, never to get on your bad side. Too late for Henry, Clara said, but I'll make a note for you. The weeks that followed were the hardest work of Clara's life, and she loved every hour of it. She rose before Ethan did, which took some doing, and she had the coffee on and the day's figures ready before he'd pulled his boots. She learned the ranch the way she'd learned the books, one line at a time. She learned which of the hands were honest and which were only present. She learned that the youngest one, a lanky 19-year-old named Toby, who blushed when she spoke to him, had a gift for horses and a head for counting that his mumbling shyness hid. She started teaching him the tally in the evenings, and within a month, he was catching errors she'd have missed. And slowly she began to feel the thing she'd told Ethan she didn't want. Not rescue. Something better and more dangerous than rescue. She began to feel like she belonged somewhere. It frightened her, that feeling, more than the Ledgers had. Because the last time she'd let herself belong to a promise, it had been paper and ink from a man 2,000 miles away, and it had ended in the dust. She caught herself more than once at the end of a long good day, feeling something warm and easy toward Ethan Walker. The way he took his hat off in the house, the way he listened when she talked figures, without pretending to understand more than he did. The way he'd started saying "we" about the ranch instead of "I," and every time she felt it, she pulled it back like a hand off a hot stove. Not again, she told herself. You came here to fight, not to fall. A man who's kind to you is not the same as a man who's yours. She held to that. Or she meant to. But the thing about Ethan Walker was that he never once tried to make her forget it. He never once presumed. And there is nothing in this world more likely to break down a woman's careful walls than a man who respects them so completely he'd never dream of climbing over. It was Toby who nearly ruined everything, and he did it without meaning to, the way the young do. They were at supper, the three of them, the way it had settled into being, and the boy, comfortable now chattering, said, "You know what they're saying in town, Miss Clara?" "I try very hard not to know what they're saying in town, Toby." "They're saying Mr. Walker's gonna marry you." He grinned, entirely pleased with himself, entirely blind to the way both adults at the table went still. "Whole town's saying it. Mrs. Halloran told the mercantile lady she's already picked out Toby." Ethan's voice wasn't sharp, but it stopped the boy cold. "Go see to the bay." She was favoring that foreleg. Toby looked between them, finally caught up to the temperature of the room, went red to his ears, and fled. The silence he left behind was enormous. Clara looked at her plate. "I'll speak to Mrs. Halloran," she said. "It isn't right people talking. It damages you." "Mr. Walker, a woman living out here who isn't—" "It doesn't damage me. It does. A man's reputation. Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name without the miss in front of it, and it stopped her the way his voice had stopped the boy. He said it quiet and careful, and he set down his fork. "I'm going to say something, and if I've got it wrong, you tell me, and we'll never speak of it, and nothing changes. You've got my word on that." He took a breath. "I don't much care what the town says, because for once the town isn't wrong about the feeling of a thing, even if they're wrong to be flapping their jaws about it. I've come to—" He stopped, started again, plainer. "I look forward to supper. I didn't used to. This house was a place I slept. It started being a place I live. And that's you. That's not the Ledgers, and it's not the money coming right. It's you." Clara's heart was going very hard. "But I know what was done to you." Ethan went on, and now he wouldn't quite look at her, gazing instead at some middle distance, a man walking across ice. "I know a man made you promises to get something out of you and then threw you away. And I would sooner cut off my own hand than be another man who wanted something from you that you didn't freely—" He shook his head. "So I'm not asking you anything. I want to be clear on that. I'm not Henry Caldwell asking you to come running. I'm just telling you where I stand. So that if you ever should feel anything, you'd know the ground was solid. That's all. That's the whole of it." He picked his fork back up. His hand wasn't quite steady. Clara sat very still and felt the whole careful wall she'd built come up against something it had no defense for, not charm, not pressure, not sweet words. Honesty. Plain, terrified, honest kindness offered with no hook in it at all. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And then I need you to let me get up from this table before I lose my nerve, because I'm not built for this the way I used to be. He broke something in me, Mr. Walker, and I don't know if it mends." Ethan, he said quietly. If we're saying true things, it's Ethan. Ethan? She tried it, and it fit her mouth better than she wanted it to. I look forward to supper too. That was all she could manage. It felt like leaping off a roof. That's where I stand. And now I'm going to go do the accounts, and neither of us is going to say another word about it tonight. Because if you're kind to me right now, I will cry, and I have cried enough in this state to last me the rest of my life. She got up. She made it to the door. Clara. She stopped, but she didn't turn around. Thank you, Ethan said, for the true thing. Ellen Doyle's handwriting was small and cramped, and shook in places the way a hand shakes when it's writing something it has been afraid to say out loud for 2 years. Clara read it once at the kitchen table, and then couldn't speak. She read it a second time to be sure she'd understood. Then she handed it across to Ethan without a word, and she watched his face as he read it, and she watched the same thing happen to him that had happened to her, the cold coming up first, and the fury coming up right behind it. Margaret Doyle was alive. That was the first blow, and it was almost a joy. But the joy didn't last past the next sentence, because Margaret Doyle was alive and she was not well. She had come home to Cincinnati 2 years ago in the middle of the night with no warning, half out of her mind with fright, and she had never once in 2 years told her own sister the whole of what had happened to her in Montana. She woke screaming some nights. She wouldn't speak of a man named Caldwell, and she had made Ellen swear over and over never to write to anyone in Silver Creek, never to answer if anyone wrote because, and here Ellen's cramped hand had pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn the paper, because Margaret said they would kill her if they knew she was still telling. Still telling. Clara had caught that too. Still telling. Which meant she'd told someone. Once. Read the last part again. Ethan said low. Out loud. I want to hear you say it, so I know I didn't dream it. Clara found the place and read it, and her voice was steady even though her hands weren't. Ellen had written that when Margaret first came home before the silence closed over her for good, she had said one thing, one strange frantic thing that Ellen had never understood, and had written down that very night, because she'd been so frightened by the look on her sister's face. Margaret had said, he's going to dam the creek and dry out every small ranch in the valley, and when they can't pay, he'll buy them for pennies, and it's all built on a lie, because the land was never his, to claim the survey was changed. Ellen, I saw the old one. I saw both of them, the real ones still in the county book, if anyone ever thinks to look. Ethan sat back slowly. The real ones still in the county book, he repeated. Both of them. She saw both surveys. She saw the original, Clara said. Her heart was going hard. The true survey. The one that shows your creek falls square inside Red Valley, and always did. Ethan Henry didn't find a mistake in an old survey. There was no mistake. He made one. He had a survey altered or forged or filed over the top of the true one, and the true one is still in the county book. Margaret saw it, 2 years ago, and he ran her out of this state before she could tell a soul who'd believe her. The kitchen was dead quiet. That's why he threatened you on the road, Ethan said. Pruitt. That's why. It was never really about your letter. It's about the book. He's terrified somebody's going to walk into the county land office and pull the original survey and lay it next to his forged one, and any judge alive would see it in a second. He stood up so fast the chair scraped. Clara, if that record's still there, then we don't have a defense, Clara said, and she stood up too, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself feel the full size of what they were holding. We have a sword. Ethan, a man, doesn't just lose a land claim for forging a survey. He goes to prison for it. This isn't a fight over water anymore. If we can put the true survey next to his, if we can show a judge the original with our own hands, Henry Caldwell doesn't just lose your creek. He loses everything. And everything he ever took from everybody, all of it comes into question. Ethan looked at her, and there was something almost like fear in it. Not for himself, she realized. For her. You understand what that means, he said quietly. You understand what a man like that will do when the thing between him and prison is one book and one office in this town. He's already run one woman out of the state. He's already sent his man to threaten you on an empty road. What do you think he'll do when he learns we're reaching for the one thing that can hang him? I think, Clara said, we'd better get to that book before he thinks to burn it. They should have gone that night. Clara would think later about how much would have been different if they'd saddled up in the dark and ridden into town and been standing at the land office door at dawn. But they didn't, because Ethan wouldn't let her ride the road again after Pruitt, and because a plan made in fear is a bad plan, and because Clara herself said they had to be careful, that if they went charging in demanding the original survey, they'd tip Caldwell off to the exact thing they knew, and he'd have it out of that book before the ink of their request was dry. So they made a careful plan instead, and carefulness cost them. The morning they finally rode into Silver Creek, the two of them together, Toby driving the wagon behind for cover, 3 months of dread and hope riding in Clara's chest, they found the county land office closed. Not shut for the day, closed. A hand-lettered notice on the door. The county recorder, a mild old man named Ferris, who'd held the post for 20 years, had resigned his position effective immediately and gone to visit family in the East. A new recorder would be appointed by the county board in due course. The office would reopen when the transition was complete. Clara stood in front of that door and felt the floor of her stomach drop away. He got there first, she whispered. Ethan's jaw was iron. Ferris wouldn't resign. That man loves that office more than he loves his own wife. 20 years. He didn't resign. He was sent away. Clara pressed her hand flat against the closed door as if she could feel through the wood to the books inside. Same as Margaret. Same as me. It's the only thing Henry knows how to do when someone's in his way. He doesn't fight them, he removes them. Frightens them, or pays them, or ruins them, until they just go. She turned. Which means the survey's still in there, Ethan. He hasn't destroyed it. If he'd destroyed it, he wouldn't need to close the whole office and run off the recorder. He's closed it because he can't get at the book clean, because there's a proper record of what's in there, and pages don't just vanish without questions. He's bought himself time. He's trying to figure out how to make the true survey disappear without it looking like it disappeared. Then we're beat either way, Ethan said. We can't get in. He can't get in clean. We're just waiting to see who finds a way first. No. Clara's mind was moving now fast the way it moved over a column of figures that didn't add up. No, we're not just waiting. Think, Ethan. Ferris ran that office 20 years. A careful man. A man who loved his records. She gripped his sleeve. A man like that keeps copies, or duplicates, or he remembers. Where did Ferris go? Notice says East visiting family. That's what the notice says. That's what Henry wants everyone to believe. Clara was already turning it over. But a man who was frightened into leaving a man who loved his office and got run out of it, that's a man with a grievance, Ethan. That's a man who might, if the right person found him, be willing to talk, and a careful old recorder run out of town in a hurry. She looked up. I'd bet he didn't leave empty-handed. I'd bet he took something with him. Insurance. Men like Ferris always keep insurance. And how in God's name do we find one old man who could be anywhere between here and the Atlantic? The same way I found everything else, Clara said. We ask the one person in this town who knows where everybody goes and why. Mrs. Halloran. Paul. The widow listened to the whole of it with her hands folded in her lap and her face giving away nothing, and when Clara had finished, she sat quiet for a long moment. You've stepped in it now, girl, she said finally. You surely have. Running off the county recorder. That's not the Henry Caldwell who jilts a bride to save face. That's a man protecting a hanging offense. She looked at Ethan. You know what you're both standing in. I know, Ethan said grimly. And you're going on anyway. He's taking my water, my father's land. He ran off a girl and near broke her mind, and now he's threatening. Ethan's voice caught just slightly, and Clara saw him master it. He threatened Clara on the road, so yes, ma'am, I'm going on anyway. Something in the old woman's face softened and shifted and hardened again into decision. Emmett Ferris, she said, did not go east. Emmett Ferris has a brother with a small place up past the Bitterroot. 3 days ride north. And if that frightened old fool ran anywhere, he ran to his brother, because Emmett Ferris hasn't the imagination to hide any place he hasn't already been. She met Clara's eyes. I know, because I nursed his wife through the fever 4 winters back, and she told me every dull thing about that family there is to know. If you want Emmett Ferris, that's where he is. And girl. She reached out and took Clara's hand again, the way she had before. If that old man kept any copy or any note, and you can get it back here before Caldwell finds a way into that office, you might just have him. But you'll have to be quick, and you'll have to be quiet, and you cannot let a living soul in this town know where you've gone. Because the moment Caldwell knows you're writing for Ferris, he'll know exactly why. Clara looked at Ethan. 3 days north, 3 days back. 6 days at the least of leaving the ranch, leaving Toby to cover for them, leaving Caldwell free to move, but 6 days that might put in her hands the one piece of paper that could end him. We go tonight, Clara said. After dark. Toby stays and runs the place and tells anyone who asks that we've gone to the far pasture for the calving. We take 2 horses, we ride light, and we don't stop in a single town where a face might be remembered. Ethan studied her. You've never ridden 3 days hard in your life. No, Clara agreed. But I never balanced a ranch's books or faced down Caldwell's man on an empty road either, and I managed both. I'll manage this. She stood, and the widow rose with her, and for a moment the 2 women just looked at each other, the old one who'd been afraid for 2 years, and the young one who'd decided to stop being afraid. Bring it back, Mrs. Halloran said quietly. Whatever he kept. Bring it back and let that girl in Cincinnati sleep through one night without screaming. That'd be worth more to me than my own 3 funerals. The ride was every bit as hard as Ethan had warned, and Clara never once complained, which he noted and never mentioned, which was its own kind of kindness. They rode by night the first stretch and slept rough by day. And something happened between them, out on that empty country, that neither had words for a thing that grows between 2 people who are frightened together and keep going anyway. By the second night riding stirrup to stirrup under a sky enormous with stars, Ethan finally said the thing he'd been carrying. Clara, if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, let me say it. If this goes wrong, if Caldwell wins, if I lose the water and the ranch and everything, I want you to know it was worth it. Not the ranch. Being wrong about you. She turned in the saddle to look at him. The first day I thought I was doing a Christian kindness for a poor girl who'd been done dirty. I thought I was rescuing you. His voice was rough. I had it exactly backwards. You walked into my life at the lowest I'd ever been, and you saved it, Clara. Not the money, not the books. Me. I was a man just sleeping in a house waiting to lose it slow. You woke me up. Clara's throat had gone tight. They rode a while in the dark. I made myself a promise, she said finally, the first night in Mrs. Halloran's boarding house. I promised I'd understand exactly how I got fooled so I'd never get fooled again. I built a whole wall on that promise. No man was ever getting past it. Not ever. She looked over at him, this steady, plain, honest man riding beside her toward the thing that could get them both killed. And you never even tried to climb it. You just stood on the other side and told me true things until I forgot why I built it. Her voice caught. I don't want the wall anymore, Ethan. That's what I've been trying to find the nerve to say for a month. When this is done, when he's beaten, I don't want the wall. Ethan reached across the space between the horses and took her hand and held it, and neither of them said anything else, because some things are said better in the holding. They found Emmett Ferris on the 4th day, at a poor little place up past the Bitterroot, exactly where the widow had said, and the old recorder took one look at Ethan Walker standing in his brother's yard, and his face crumpled like a man who'd been waiting to be found. You came about the book, Ferris said before either of them spoke. God help me, you came about the survey. We did, Clara said gently. The old man sagged down onto the porch step and put his face in his hands. I knew somebody would. I knew it. I couldn't. He looked up, and there were tears standing in his old eyes. I couldn't destroy it. He told me to. His man came to my office 3 weeks past and told me a certain page had to be gone, and there was money on the desk, more money than my whole salary, and he said, if the page stayed, there'd be trouble. For me. For my wife. His hands shook. I've kept that office honest 20 years. 20 years. And I sat there, and I looked at that money, and I looked at that man's face, and I knew he wasn't asking. So His voice broke. You resigned, Clara said softly. You ran. I ran. The shame in it was terrible. I'm an old coward and I ran. But Miss... And here he lifted his head, and something came into his ruined old face that was almost pride. I did not destroy that page. I couldn't do it. 20 years of keeping records honest, and I could not put my own hand to burning a true one. So before I left, he pushed himself up off the step, unsteady. Before I left that office in the dark, I did the only brave thing I've done in my whole poor life. Clara didn't dare breathe. I made a true copy of the original survey, Ferris said. Under my own hand and my own seal, certified the way the law allows, notarized by Judge Holloway's own clerk the same morning before I ever gave notice. A certified copy carries the weight of the original in any court in the territory, and I took it with me. He looked between them. It's the only thing of value I own now. It's cost me my position and my home and my good name, and I've laid awake every night since wondering why I bothered, since there was no one to give it to. His voice steadied. And now here you are. So I suppose that's why. He went into the house. When he came back out, he was holding an oilcloth packet, and he held it a moment longer, and then he put it into Clara's hands. The original survey of the Walker homestead, he said. Certified true. It shows that Creek Falls dead center in Red Valley land and always did. And laid beside the forged survey Caldwell filed, which any judge can call up from the state office in Helena, a copy he can't reach it, proves the second one's a lie, and a lie somebody made on purpose. His hand closed briefly over both of hers. That's a forgery of a public record, miss. That's a felony. That paper doesn't just save Mr. Walker's water. That paper puts Henry Caldwell in a cell. Clara held the packet against her chest and felt the whole terrible weight of it, Margaret's screaming nights, and Ferris's ruined name, and her own humiliation in the dust, and the girl before Margaret. If there'd even been a girl before Margaret. All of it. All the wreckage that one patient, careful, ruthless man had left behind him for years, all of it suddenly answerable, suddenly provable, resting in one oilcloth packet in her two hands. Thank you, was all she could manage. Mr. Ferris, you have no idea what you've thank you. Get it to a judge, the old man said. A judge Caldwell doesn't own. And Godspeed you, because you've got a hard road home, and he'll be looking for you by now. He was looking for them. They knew it before they were 2 days back down the road, because a rider passed them going north in a lather, and Ethan pulled his hat low, and Clara turned her face away, and the man went by without a second glance, but Ethan's jaw was tight for an hour after. Caldwell's man, he said finally. Or one of them, riding hard for the Bitterroot. He knows where we went. He can't know what we found. He can guess. Toby's a good boy, but the whole valley's had 6 days to notice we were gone. Somebody talked. Somebody always talks. He looked at the country ahead of them, the long, empty miles back toward Silver Creek. By the time we reach town, he'll know we've been to Ferris. He'll know we've got something. And a man who ran off the recorder to bury this isn't going to just let us ride into the courthouse with it. He was right. They came down out of the North Country on the 6th day, saddle-sore and hollow-eyed, the packet wrapped tight and carried always against Clara's own body. Now never in a saddlebag, never out of her hands, and half a day's ride from Silver Creek on the last empty stretch of road before the town, they saw the riders waiting. 4 of them, strung across the road, waiting, and in the middle of them on a fine tall horse in a fine dark coat, sitting easy as a man who'd never once in his life doubted he would win, was a man Clara had crossed a continent to marry, and had never until this exact moment laid eyes on. Henry Caldwell. Ethan reined in hard. His hand moved slow toward the rifle in his scabbard. "Don't," Clara said low and fast. "Ethan, 4-1, don't. That's what he wants. He wants a reason. A dead cowboy and a jilted girl on an empty road who'd ever ask a question." Her heart was slamming, but her voice was iron. "We don't win this with a gun. We never were going to. Let me talk to him." "Clara, he's never seen me," she breathed. "Do you understand? He sent for me and threw me away. And he has never once looked at my face. To him, I'm nothing. I'm the placeholder. The girl he used and forgot." Her hand pressed flat over the packet against her ribs. "Let him keep thinking that. Let me be nothing a little longer. It's the last mistake he's ever going to make." And she nudged her horse forward alone toward the man who had ruined her life, carrying against her heart the one thing in the world that could end him. And Henry Caldwell watched her come with the mild, bored, faintly amused expression of a man who could not possibly imagine that the small, dusty woman riding toward him was already quietly completely the winner of a war he didn't yet know he'd lost. She went out into the evening with her heart pounding and something in her chest that had been clenched shut for a long, long time, easing open just a crack. And she didn't know yet that it was the most dangerous thing she could possibly have let happen, because a woman with something to lose fights differently than a woman with nothing. And Henry Caldwell was about to make sure she had everything to lose. Fog. The blow came 10 days later, and it came as such things do, dressed up as good news. A rider came out from town, a clerk from the land office sweating and apologetic with a folded paper and a message he plainly didn't want to deliver. Ethan read it standing on the porch, and Clara watched his face go from puzzled to disbelieving to something white and still. That scared her more than anger would have. "What?" she said. "Ethan, what is it?" He handed her the paper without a word. It was a notice of claim. And what it claimed in the dry, cold language of the law was that the North Creek, the silver water that ran through the heart of Red Valley, the water Ethan's father had homesteaded, and Ethan had held for 15 years, did not belong to Red Valley Ranch at all. It claimed the original survey had been filed wrong. It claimed the creek and the 60 acres around it fell inside the boundary of an old railroad land grant. And it claimed that the railroad land grant had 3 weeks ago been purchased in full by Henry Caldwell. "He can't," Clara heard herself say. This is 15 years. This is your father's." He found the flaw. Ethan's voice was terribly quiet. Whatever mistake some surveyor made 40 years ago, Caldwell found it. Patient. Waited. Bought the paper the mistake was written on. He looked out at the creek, running bright and heedless through land that a piece of paper now said was no longer his. He doesn't want the ranch, Clara. He never did. He wants the water. The ranch was only ever the thing standing on top of it. A terrible laugh. "I told you at the livery. He tried to buy this creek 2 years ago, and I told him no. And he just went and waited. 3 years. Bled me through Hollis. Kept me too broke to fight. And now he's found a lawyer's flaw in a dead surveyor's line, and he's going to take it anyway." Clara's hands had gone cold around the paper. But underneath the cold, the old anger was waking up the church doorway, anger the clean, burning kind. "He has to prove the claim," she said. "It'll go before the county, a hearing. That's how these things work. Against Caldwell's lawyers, Caldwell's money, Caldwell's friends on every side of it." Ethan shook his head. "Clara, half the men who'd sit in judgment on a thing like this owe Caldwell money or want his goodwill. I can't outspend him. I can barely feed the ranch. He's had 3 years to build this, and I've got—" He stopped. "You've got me," Clara said. He looked at her. "You keep forgetting that," she said, and she was surprised at the steel in her own voice. "You keep saying I when you mean we. You've got a woman who reads contracts better than his lawyers write them. You've got a woman who found the Hollis theft in one afternoon while you'd missed it for 3 years. And you've got a woman who has personally been lied to and thrown away by Henry Caldwell and would like nothing better in this life than to watch him lose." She folded the notice of claim and slid it into her apron pocket like she was pocketing a weapon. He made one mistake, Ethan. What mistake? Far as I can see, he hasn't made a one. He put it in writing. Clara's eyes had gone bright and hard. Men like Henry are so sure of their own cleverness, they can't help but be thorough. Pruitt said it to me the first day. He likes to have his affairs arranged well ahead. Everything he does he documents. The Hollis payments, the land grant purchase, the survey he bought. Somewhere in this county there is a paper trail 3 years long, and every page of it is a page he never dreamed anyone would think to read. She looked up. I read papers, Ethan. It's the one thing in this world I'm truly good at. He hid this theft in the law. So we're going to beat him with the law, and I know exactly where to start. Where? The girl from Ohio, Clara said. Because I have never once believed she just disappeared. A woman doesn't vanish out of a town this size and leave no wake. Something happened to her. And if Henry Caldwell did to her a piece of what he's done to us, then somewhere there's a record of it. And a man who's done a thing twice. She pulled the pocket of her apron flat over the folded notice. Is a man with a pattern. And a pattern, Ethan, is a thing you can show to a judge. Wookie. She started the next morning, and she started with Mrs. Halloran because if there was one person in Silver Creek who knew where the bodies were buried, it was the woman who'd buried 3 husbands and outlived every scandal in the county. The Ohio girl. The widow set down her teacup and gave Clara a long, measuring look across her worn front room. Now why would you go digging up that poor creature? Because I think the same man who ruined her is about to take Ethan Walker's water, and I think if she'd tell me her story, it might help me stop him. Mrs. Halloran was quiet for a moment. Then she said, her name was Margaret. Margaret Doyle. Sweet, plain little thing. Came out from Cincinnati 2 summers back, same as you, letters a promise a trunk. Caldwell's promise. The old woman's mouth thinned. And same as you, she got to town and found the door shut. Only there wasn't any Ethan Walker at the stagecoach for her. There was nobody. She'd nothing, and nobody. And she stayed with me a while. And I'll tell you a thing I've never told a soul, girl, because I think you've earned it. And because I'm old enough now that I've stopped being afraid of that man. She leaned forward. Margaret Doyle didn't just leave. Before she left, she came to me one night in an awful state, and she'd found something out. She'd been so hurt and so angry, she'd done a bold thing. She'd gone out to Caldwell's place to face him, to demand why. And she overheard something she wasn't meant to. About the water. About some plan he had for the whole valley. She was frightened half to death, said she was going to the newspaper in Helena, said she'd tell what she'd heard. And 2 days later, she was gone. Bought a stage ticket east, they said. Left in the night. Never wrote. Never a word. The widow's old eyes were hard. I never believed she left because she wanted to. I think that girl found out something Henry Caldwell couldn't have known, and I think she got sent east, frightened off or paid off or worse before she could tell it. And I think about her every single day, and I have never once had the courage to say so out loud. Until now. Clara sat very still. Do you know where she went? She asked. Cincinnati. Did she have family? A sister. She spoke of a sister in Cincinnati. Mrs. Halloran's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her tea. But child, if you go pulling on this thread, you understand what you're pulling on. Margaret Doyle found out something 2 years ago, and she's not been heard from since. You go asking the same questions she asked. Then I'll know I'm asking the right ones, Clara said. The widow looked at her for a long, long moment. And then slowly she reached over and covered Clara's hand with her own dry, papery one. You're not the girl who stepped off that stage, she said. That girl I felt sorry for. This one I'd be a fool to cross. A ghost of a smile. Write to the sister. Ellen, I think the name was. Ellen Doyle, Cincinnati. And God keep you, girl, because if you're right about what he is, you're taking on a devil. Back. Clara wrote the letter that night. She wrote it 3 times before she got it right. Careful, plain, giving nothing away that could hurt anyone if it fell into the wrong hands, but enough to make a grieving sister trust her. She asked if Margaret had ever arrived home. She asked if Margaret was well. She said only that she was a woman in Montana who had been wronged by the same man and who thought their two stories might be pieces of one larger truth. She rode into town herself to post it because she didn't trust it to anyone else's hands. And it was on the way back on the empty road out of Silver Creek that she got the first taste of what she'd stepped into, because she was not more than a mile out of town when a rider fell in behind her and stayed behind her, matching her pace, saying nothing for the better part of 2 miles. She knew that gray vest. She'd seen it her first day in this county in the middle of the street when it belonged to a man who'd read her the end of her old life without lowering his eyes. Samuel Pruitt, Caldwell's man. He caught up to her slowly, unhurried, the way a man does when he wants you to understand he could have caught you sooner. He tipped his hat. "Miss Whitmore, you're a long way out." "So are you, Mr. Pruitt. Just riding?" His eyes went just for a second to the empty saddlebag where her letter had been. "Heard you're keeping books for Ethan Walker now. Fallen on your feet. That's resourceful for a girl who had $4. "I've always been resourceful, Mr. Pruitt. It's how I notice things." Something flickered in his face. What things would those be? "Oh, this and that?" She kept her voice light, pleasant, though her heart was slamming. "Freight rates, old surveys, land grants, the kind of thing that turns up when a person keeps good books." She smiled at him, and she watched the smile land. Watched him understand that she knew not everything, but enough. "You tell Mr. Caldwell I said hello, and you tell him I remembered to keep good books. He'll know what I mean." Pruitt's easy manner had gone. He studied her for a long, cold moment, and when he spoke again, the pretense of pleasantness was gone with it. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "I'm going to give you a piece of advice, and it's the only kindness anybody in Mr. Caldwell's employ is likely to do you, so I'd take it. A girl who's already lost, everything's got nothing left to lose, and that makes her brave. But brave people out here have a way of moving on. Sudden. There was a girl before you did some asking around, real bright girl, curious." He let it hang. "She's not curious anymore." And there it was, the confession, or near enough to one delivered as a warning, the arrogance of a man so sure of his master's power he couldn't resist showing his hand to a woman he thought too small to matter. Clara's blood had gone to ice. But she'd learned something in the church doorway, and she'd learned it: deep fear and anger are next-door neighbors, and a person can move from one house to the other in a single breath. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, and her voice didn't shake. She'd never know how, but it didn't shake. "You just told me 2 things you should have kept to yourself. You told me you're afraid of what I know, and you told me exactly what happened to Margaret Doyle." She gathered her reins. "I'd get a better line of work if I were you. Because the man you serve is going to lose, and when a man like that falls, he doesn't fall alone. He takes everybody who did his dirty errands right down with him. You might think on that next time you're sent to threaten a woman on an empty road." She touched her heels to the horse and rode, and she did not look back, though every inch of her spine expected something. It didn't come. When she finally dared a glance over her shoulder a quarter mile on, Pruitt was still sitting his horse in the middle of the road, small in the distance, watching her go. She made it back to Red Valley, shaking so hard she could barely dismount. Ethan came off the porch at a run. Clara, what happened? You're white as—" "Pruitt." She got out. "On the road. He knows I've been asking. Ethan, he as good as told me. About Margaret. He said she's not curious anymore. He threatened me, And then, Ethan Walker's arms were around her, and she let them be, because for once in her careful, guarded, self-protecting life, she did not have the strength to hold the wall up, and she buried her face against his shoulder and shook. "You're all right," he was saying low into her hair. "You're home. You're all right. He touches one hair on your head, I'll—" He stopped himself. His arms tightened. "I never should have let you go into town alone. I never should have—" "No." Clara pulled back, and even shaking, even frightened, the steel was still in her, the steel that had come to her in the church doorway, and never entirely left. "No, don't you dare. Don't you dare start deciding where I go, and don't go to keep me safe. That's how it starts. That's how they get you." She gripped his forearms. "Do you understand what just happened out there?" He's scared. "Ethan Henry Caldwell sent his man to frighten me off. which means the thing I'm reaching for is a thing he can't afford for me to reach. He wouldn't waste the threat if I were harmless." Her eyes were wet, but they were fierce. "I posted the letter. It's gone. It's on its way to Cincinnati right now, past anywhere Pruitt can stop it. And when Margaret Doyle's sister writes back, if she writes back." "When she writes back," Clara said, "we're going to know exactly what that girl found out that was worth making her disappear over. And I promise you, Ethan Walker, I promise you, it's going to be the same thing he's using to take your water. Because a man like Henry doesn't have two secrets. He has one secret, and he's used it twice, and the second time—" Her hands tightened on his arms. "He made the mistake of using it on me." Ethan looked down at her. This woman who 3 months ago had wept in the dust of Silver Creek, and now stood in his yard, shaking with fear, and absolutely refusing to be afraid. "You know what I think," he said quietly. "What?" "I think Henry Caldwell spent 3 years and a fortune making sure he threw away exactly the wrong woman. He reached up slow enough that she could have stopped him and tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face. And I think he has no idea yet just how much that's going to cost him." The reply from Cincinnati came 11 days later, and what was written in it was worse and far, far more dangerous to Henry Caldwell than anything Clara had let herself imagine. Henry Caldwell let her come almost close enough to touch before he spoke. "That's far enough, I think." His voice was smooth and warm and entirely unbothered, the voice of a man who had never once in his life been made to raise it. "You'd be the Walker woman, the bookkeeper." His eyes moved over her, mild and dismissive, cataloging her, the way a man prices a horse he's already decided not to buy. "I confess I expected someone more formidable. All this trouble over a slip of a thing keeping ledgers." And Clara understood in that first moment that Mrs. Halloran had been right, and she'd been right too. He didn't know her. He had sent for her, spun a year of letters to her, built her whole ruined hope with his own hand, and he was looking straight into her face without the faintest flicker of recognition. To Henry Caldwell, she had never been a person. She had been a line in a ledger of his own, a placeholder, used and struck through and forgotten. She was going to let him keep thinking that for exactly as long as it served her. "I keep Mr. Walker's books," she said quietly. "Yes." "Then you're a sensible woman. Sensible women understand arithmetic." He walked his horse a step nearer. Easy, unhurried, four-armed men strung behind him like a fence. "So, let me do some for you. Ethan Walker owes the bank more than his ranch is worth. His freight costs eat him alive, and the land his creek runs through was never legally his, a matter of a faulty old survey, which the county will confirm in due course. He is finished. He has been finished for 3 years. He simply hasn't had the sense to lie down." He smiled, and it was a pleasant smile, and it was the coldest thing Clara had ever seen. "You rode a very long way north for something. I don't know what old Ferris gave you, and I don't especially care, because whatever it is, it changes nothing. I hold the paper, I hold the bank, I hold this county. Give me whatever you've got. Come to work for me instead. I always have need of someone good with figures, and I'll see Walker leaves his ranch with enough in his pocket to start over somewhere else. Refuse, and he leaves with nothing, and you leave with him." He spread his gloved hands. "I'm being generous. I'm nearly always generous. It costs so little when you've already won." Behind her, Clara heard Ethan's horse shift, heard the creak of leather as his hand moved, and she said without turning, in a voice pitched only to carry back to him, "Ethan, no." And to her everlasting relief, the creak stopped. She looked up at Henry Caldwell, at his fine coat, and his easy smile, and his 4 hired guns, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not fear, not even hatred quite. What she felt looking at him was a kind of vast and terrible calm, the calm of a woman who has already counted every card in the deck and knows exactly which one she is holding. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "may I ask you something before I answer?" "By all means." Do you remember a woman named Margaret Doyle? For just a breath, just one something moved behind his eyes. It was there and gone so fast that his four men would never have seen it. But Clara was looking for it, and she saw it, and it told her everything. "I don't believe I do," he said. "No," Clara agreed softly. "I don't suppose you would. You don't remember the ones you throw away. That's rather the whole point of throwing them away, isn't it? So they stop being people and start being tidy." She tilted her head. "Do you remember a woman you wrote to for a year, a poor girl from Philadelphia? You told her about a porch that faced the sunrise. You told her your eyes tired in the evenings, and you wanted a wife who'd read to you. You had her sell everything she owned and cross 2,000 miles of this country on the strength of your handwriting. And then you married Eleanor Vance 3 weeks before that poor girl's stage even arrived, and you sent your man to read her the news in the middle of the street so the whole town would watch, so no one would ever wonder whose choice it was." Her voice never rose. It didn't have to. "Do you remember her, Mr. Caldwell?" Henry Caldwell went very still. "That was you," he said slowly. "That was me." And Clara watched the recalculation move across his face, watched the mild dismissal drain out of it, and something sharper and warier come up in its place. Because a man like Henry Caldwell understood better than anyone alive that the most dangerous person in the world is the one you personally taught to hate you. "Well," he said, and the warmth had gone thin. "Then you understand better than most what I'm capable of when someone stands in my way. So you'll understand this isn't a negotiation I lose." "Oh, I don't think you understand me at all," Clara said. "You've spent this whole conversation certain you were talking to a bookkeeper you could frighten or buy. Let me tell you who you're actually talking to." She kept her hand well away from her body, now both hands visible empty, resting easy on the pommel, because she did not want to give a single one of those 4 nervous men a reason. "You're talking to the woman who found the Hollis theft in one afternoon. You're talking to the woman who wrote to Cincinnati and got back Margaret Doyle's whole story in her sister's own hand. The dam you mean to build, the ranches you mean to dry out and buy for pennies, all of it written down and waiting. You're talking to the woman who just rode 6 days to Emmett Ferris and back." Yippee. She let that land. Let it sit in the space between them. And Ferris didn't burn that page, Mr. Caldwell. He couldn't do it. 20 years of honest records, and he could not put his own hand to a lie. So before he ran, he made a certified copy of the true survey under seal notarized weight of the original in any court in the territory. And this morning, it is no longer his, and it is no longer mine. Danae. Henry Caldwell's face had gone the color of old ash. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Clara smiled, and it was not a kind smile, and it was the first genuinely happy she had felt since she'd stepped off that stagecoach. "You closed the land office because you couldn't make the true survey disappear from the county book without questions. But you never once thought about the copy, did you? You never thought a frightened old man might find the one piece of courage you couldn't buy out of him." She leaned forward slightly in the saddle. "The original survey shows your creek falls dead center in Walkerland and always did. Laid beside the survey, you filed the one the state office in Helena holds a copy of the one you can't reach and can't burn and can't run off. It proves your survey is a forgery. And forging a public record, Mr. Caldwell, isn't a thing a man pays a fine for. It's a thing a man goes to prison for. It calls into question every claim you've ever filed, every ranch you've ever taken, every deal you've ever built on that one rotten stone." Her voice dropped soft and final. "You didn't come out here to stop us reaching a courthouse. You came out here because you already knew it was too late and you wanted to look at whatever it was that beat you before it did." For a long, long moment, nobody moved. The 4 riders behind Caldwell had gone tense and uncertain, glancing at one another, at their employer, at the woman who was speaking to a man they feared, as if he were nothing at all. And then Henry Caldwell did the thing that told Clara she had won, because a winning man does not do it. He offered money. "Whatever Walker's paying you," he said, and his voice had lost every trace of its warmth. now was low and fast and stripped bare. "I'll triple it. I'll give you the deed to a place of your own. A woman of your gifts, wasted on a failing ranch, and a man who can't count you could be." "Stop!" Clara said it quietly, but it stopped him. "Do you hear yourself? You're doing it again, right now, this very minute. You're looking at a person and trying to work out what promise will make them come to you." Her eyes were bright and hard and wet all at once. "That's all you know how to do. You did it to Margaret, and you did it to me, and you're doing it to me again, standing here beaten, because you cannot conceive of a person who wants something you can't buy or frighten out of them." She shook her head slowly. "I don't want your money, Mr. Caldwell. I don't even want your ruin particularly. I'd have been glad once just to be let alone. But you couldn't let anyone alone. You had to keep taking. And now the taking's done. You take that copy to a judge in this county," Caldwell said very low, "and I'll have it in the fire before the ink of your filing is dry. I own half the men who'd sit that bench. You know nothing about how this country works." "I know exactly how it works," Clara said, "which is why the copy isn't in this county, and it isn't going to a judge you own." And here she played the last card, the one she and Ethan had settled on the long dark ride home, the card that had cost them a full extra day. "We didn't come straight back, Mr. Caldwell. We rode wide through Helena." That certified copy of the true survey, along with Ellen Doyle's sworn letter and a full accounting of the Hollis freight arrangement, was placed 4 days ago in the hands of the Territorial Marshal's Office of Federal Office, Mr. Caldwell, that you do not own in a capital where your name means nothing but a complaint on a docket. It is already filed. It is already sworn. It is already beyond your reach, and mine both. She straightened in the saddle. "There is nothing left to burn. There is nothing left to buy. There is only the question of whether you sit that fine horse there and let us pass down this road to our home, or whether you do something right now in front of 4 witnesses who will each be very eager to explain that they were only following orders that turns a forgery charge into a hanging one." Silence. The wind moved over the empty road. One of the 4 riders, the youngest, quietly let his hand fall away from his gun. And Henry Caldwell, landowner deceiver, the patient devil of the whole valley, the man who had thrown Clara Whitmore away in the dust like she was nothing, looked at her and understood at last and completely that the nothing he had discarded had been the one thing in the world he could not afford to underestimate. "Get off my road," he said. But it wasn't a threat anymore. It was the sound of a man who had nothing left but the words. "It was never your road," Clara said gently, and she turned her horse and she rode back to Ethan, and the 2 of them went down the road toward Silver Creek, at a walk, an unhurried, deliberate, unbroken walk, because Clara would not give Henry Caldwell the satisfaction of seeing them hurry. And behind them, Henry Caldwell and his 4 men sat their horses and did not follow, because there was nothing left to chase. The hearing, when it finally came, was almost an anticlimax, which is how Clara had wanted it, because a thing done properly in the daylight has no drama left in it, and she'd had a lifetime's fill of drama. The Territorial Marshal's Office did not move fast, but it moved. The certified copy of the true survey came before a federal judge in Helena, who owed Henry Caldwell nothing and cared for his money less. It was laid beside the survey Caldwell had filed, and the 2 were compared, and the forgery was as plain as Ferris had promised. The altered boundary, the changed line, the whole quiet theft written out for anyone with eyes. Ellen Doyle's letter was entered. Emmett Ferris himself came down from the Bitterroot and testified, and his hands didn't shake, and Clara thought that the old man stood straighter on that witness stand than he had on his brother's porch. A man who had done one brave thing at the end and had come to see it through. And Margaret Doyle, this was the part that stayed with Clara longest. Margaret Doyle did not have to come at all. Her sworn letter and her sister's testimony were enough. She was allowed to remain in Cincinnati in her own home, and never once had to look at Henry Caldwell's face again. Clara had insisted on that quietly through the marshal's office, that whatever else happened, the girl who screamed in the night would not be dragged back across a continent to relive it. It was the one thing she'd asked for herself, and it was the thing she was proudest of. Henry Caldwell did not go to the gallows. Clara had said prison, and prison was where he went. A forgery of a public record, the fraudulent land claims that unraveled behind it the whole patient architecture of theft, collapsing once the first stone was pulled. The dam was never built. The valley kept its water. The small ranches that Caldwell had meant to dry out and swallow went on drinking from the creek that ran through Red Valley. And more than one of those ranchers' men who had shrugged and looked away. The day Clara wept in the street, came out to the ranch afterward, hats in their hands, to say a thing that was hard for proud men to say. Eleanor Vance. Caldwell, who had married the finest gentleman in the county, and discovered she had married a felon, went back to her father's house and was not much spoken of. Clara felt something for her that surprised her. Not triumph, a kind of sorrow. Eleanor had been chosen for her father's land the same way Clara had been chosen for her poverty, one more woman priced and slotted into Henry Caldwell's arithmetic. The only difference was which of them the paper had happened to favor. Clara sent her no message and wished her no harm, and thought that was the closest thing to grace she had in her, and Hollis freight and supply. The chokehold, the hand around the valley's throat, was found in the wreckage of Caldwell's papers, to have been his all along, exactly as Clara had known in one afternoon at a kitchen table. With him gone, the ranchers of the valley did a thing they should have done years before they went in together, the lot of them, and bought the freight line themselves, and set an honest rate, and named Ethan Walker to keep the books. Ethan laughed out loud when they asked him. "You've got the wrong Walker for that," he told them. "You want the one who can actually count." And he looked at Clara across the room, and every man there understood him, and that was the first time in that valley that Clara Whitmore was spoken of not as the jilted bride, not as the placeholder, not as the woman who'd been thrown away, but as the one who'd saved them. They were married in the little church at Silver Creek in the fall, and it was a small wedding, and it was nothing at all like the grand thing Henry Caldwell's letters had once promised a foolish, hopeful girl in Philadelphia. It was better. Clara stood at the back of that church on the morning of it in a plain dress that Mrs. Halloran had helped her sew, and she thought about the last time she had come to a town expecting a wedding. The valley of borrowed hopes, the bundle of a liar's letters, the certainty that her life was about to be handed to her by a man she'd never met. She thought about stepping down off that stagecoach into the news that broke her. She thought about standing in the dust with a whole town watching her drown. And she thought I would not go back and spare myself a single minute of it. Because if Henry Caldwell had been what his letters said, if he had met her at the stage, if he had married her, if she had gotten the porch that faced the sunrise, she would have spent her whole life as the thing she'd been raised to be. A chosen woman, a woman who mattered because a man had selected her. She would never have found out what she could do. She would never have found the Hollis theft, or written to Cincinnati, or ridden 6 days through the wild country carrying a dead survey against her heart, or stood alone on an empty road and taken apart the most powerful man in the county with nothing but the truth and her own nerve. She would never have found out that she was formidable. He had thrown her away because she was poor and far off and desperate, thinking her the safest kind of person to discard. He had thrown away the one person in the whole territory who could destroy him. Mrs. Halloran appeared at her elbow, sharp-eyed and misty all at once, and squeezed her arm. "Well, girl," the old woman said, "you ready?" "I've been ready," Clara said, "since a cowboy carried my trunk up your steps and told me it wasn't the end of my life." And she walked up that aisle toward Ethan Walker, who stood there in his one good coat, turning his hat in his hands, the way he had the very first day. Looking at her, the way he had looked at her in the middle of that cruel street, like she was a person, like she was the only person, and she did not walk toward him out of desperation or fear, or because she had nowhere else in the world to go. She walked toward him because she had chosen to. Because she had counted everything there was to count, and this was the sum she wanted. When the preacher asked, her voice did not shake. And afterward, on the steps of that little church with the whole valley, there the ranchers and their wives. Toby grinning fit to split old Ferris. Come down special from the Bitterroot. Mrs. Halloran weeping without shame. Ethan took both her hands in his and said low, just for her, the same words he'd said in the dust of that street the day everything ended and everything began. "You're not the one who was thrown away, Clara." "No," she said. "You're the one I chose." "And the one I chose back," she said. That's the part he never understood. It was never about being chosen. She looked out over the valley, the creek running silver through it, the land that was theirs now, truly and freely and forever. It's about getting to choose. The first years of a marriage tell you what it's truly made of, and Clara and Ethan's told them plainly it was made to hold weight. The winter after the wedding was a hard one, the hardest in 20 years, the old-timers said, and it came near to taking everything they'd fought Henry Caldwell to keep. The creek froze solid. The cattle bunched and bawled against the cold. Toby lost the tips of 2 fingers to frostbite, pulling a heifer out of a drift at midnight, and Clara sat up 3 nights running, keeping the wounds clean, while Ethan and the boy took the stock in shifts. There was a stretch in February when the feed ran so low that Ethan came in one night, sat down at the same kitchen table where Clara had first found the Hollis theft, and put his face in his hands. "We might lose them," he said. "Half the herd, if this doesn't break soon." And Clara, who 2 years before had wept in the dust of a street with $4 to her name and no idea how to save herself, let alone anyone else. Clara pulled her chair around next to his and opened the ledger and said, "Then let's find out exactly how much we can afford to lose and make sure we lose the right half. Show me which stock's your breeders. We don't panic. We count." We count. It had become the truest thing between them. When the world came at Ethan Walker the way it comes at every rancher, weather and debt and bad luck and worse men, his first instinct was still always to carry it alone, to say "I" when he meant "we," to stand between his wife and the trouble the way a man of his generation had been raised to. And every single time Clara pulled her chair around next to his and made him say the true numbers out loud, because she had learned in the worst season of her life that a trouble named and counted is a trouble half beaten, and a trouble carried alone in the dark is the one that breaks you. They didn't lose half the herd. They lost a third, and it hurt, and they survived it. And in the spring the creek ran silver again through land that a federal judge had confirmed was theirs beyond any man's power to steal, and they started over, the way people out there always started over, by getting up in the morning and doing the next thing. Their first child came the following autumn. A girl. Ethan had wanted secretly, a boy most men out there did. Another pair of hands for the work, and he never said it, but Clara knew the way she'd come to know everything about him. And she watched his face the moment the midwife put that squalling, red, furious little scrap of a daughter into his arms, and she watched every thought of a boy go clean out of the man's head forever. "She's mad as a hornet," Ethan said, wonder-struck, this big cowboy holding a baby like it was made of blown glass. "Listen to her. She's furious." "She's got a right to be," Clara said, exhausted and radiant. "It's a hard world she's come into." "What do we call her?" Clara had known for months, though she'd never said. "Margaret," she said quietly. Ethan went still. He looked up from the baby. "After the girl," Clara said. "Margaret Doyle, because she was brave when it cost her everything, and nobody ever thanked her, and nobody ever named a single good thing after her. So we will." Her voice caught. "This valley's got its water because a frightened girl from Cincinnati saw 2 surveys and couldn't keep quiet, even knowing what it would cost her. Our daughter's going to carry that name into a life that girl never got to have. That's the closest thing to justice I know how to make." Ethan looked down at his daughter for a long moment. Then he bent and pressed his lips to the tiny, furious forehead. "Margaret Walker," he said. "All right, you hear that, little one? You've got a big name to grow into." And 1,000 miles east, in a house in Cincinnati, a woman who had not slept a whole night through in 3 years received a letter and read that a child had been born in Montana, on the very land she'd tried to save, and had been given her name. Ellen Doyle wrote back that when she read it aloud, Margaret cried for the first time in longer than either of them could remember. Not the frightened weeping of her worst nights, but something else, something that had been locked up and finally came loose. Margaret wrote at the bottom of that letter in her own hand, the first words she'd written to anyone in Silver Creek since the night she fled it. Tell the little one her name means somebody remembered. That's more than I ever hoped for. That's enough. Clara kept that letter in the same drawer where she'd once kept a liar's letters, and it healed something in her that she hadn't known was still broken. Henry Caldwell wrote to her once, from prison. It came the second spring, forwarded through the marshal's office, and Clara knew the hand the moment she saw it. That same fine, careful, deliberate handwriting that had once spun a whole false life for a hopeful girl in Philadelphia. She held the envelope a long time before she opened it. Part of her wanted to burn it, unread, the way he'd tried to burn everything that could touch him. But she'd sworn that first night in the boarding house that she would understand, and understanding meant looking even at this. The letter was not what she expected. It was not an apology. A man like Henry Caldwell did not apologize. The machinery in him that would have made an apology possible had never been built. But it was not a threat either, and it was not a plea. It was, she realized as she read it, the only thing such a man had left when everything else was stripped away. It was an attempt to understand her the way she had understood him because she had beaten him, and men like Henry Caldwell could not abide a thing they did not understand. I have had a great deal of time to consider, he had written, and I find I keep returning to you. I chose you because you were poor and distant, and I believed disposable. I have built my life on being right about such things. You were the one time I was wrong. I should like to know how a woman I could not even be troubled to meet came to be the thing that ended me. Was it the cowboy? Was it luck? What did I fail to see? Clara read it twice, and then she took up a pen, and she wrote back, and it was the last thing she ever said to Henry Caldwell. You ask what you failed to see. I'll tell you, because I think you'll spend the rest of your life turning it over otherwise, and I'd rather you had the answer than the wondering. You didn't fail to see the cowboy or the survey or the letter to Cincinnati. Those were only how it happened. What you failed to see was simpler than all of it. You looked at a poor woman and saw a thing with no value because you had never once in your life believed that a person's worth was anything other than what someone else would pay for them. That was your whole philosophy, Mr. Caldwell. You priced everything. Margaret Doyle, me, Eleanor, even your own wife was a parcel of land to you, and a man who believes people are only worth what they can be sold for will always throw away exactly the person who was never for sale because he cannot see her. She is invisible to him. You didn't lose to a cowboy or a survey. You lost to a woman you'd decided was worthless, which meant you never watched her, which meant you never saw her coming. I hope that answers you. I don't expect we'll write again. She never heard from him after that. He served his years, and when they were done, he did not come back to the valley. There was nothing there for him, and everyone there knew exactly what he was, and he drifted off into the great anonymous West, and was in the end exactly the thing he had made of so many others forgotten. Discarded. A name struck through in a ledger. Clara thought there was a kind of justice in that too, the quietest kind, the kind that needs no gallows. She did not gloat over it. She had learned that gloating was a small thing, and she had stopped being small a long time ago. The ranch grew. That was the plain fact of the years Red Valley grew, the way a thing grows when honest work meets good land, and neither one is being bled by a hidden hand. Clara ran the books for the whole valley's freight line, and ran them so well that ranchers 3 counties over sent their sons to learn the trade from her. She took those boys, and in time some girls too, which scandalized a few of the older wives until it stopped scandalizing anyone at all. And she taught them the thing she'd learned the hardest way there was that the man who keeps the count keeps the power, and that no one should ever hand another person the sole keeping of the numbers that decide their life. You learn to read a contract close. She'd tell them the same words every time, tapping the table the way she'd tapped it that first afternoon for Ethan. Especially the parts buried deep where a hurried person wouldn't look. That's where they put the chokehold. They always bury it deep, read it anyway, More than one of those children grew up to run ranches of their own and hold their own land against men who'd have taken it. And they did it because a woman who'd once had everything taken from her had made sure they'd know how to count. Toby stayed. Of course, Toby stayed. He'd grown from a blushing, mumbling 19-year-old into a steady man with a gift for horses and a wife of his own and a place at the Walkers' table that was never in question. He named his own first son Ethan and pretended it was after a fine uncle back east and fooled absolutely no one, least of all Ethan Walker, who went out to the barn after the christening and stood a while where no one could see him. And Mrs. Halloran, old, sharp, 3 times widowed Mrs. Halloran, who had been afraid for 2 years, and then decided at the very end of her life to stop. Mrs. Halloran lived to be very old, and she lived to see it all, and Clara went to her every week to the last. It was the widow who said the thing that Clara carried longest near the end, when the old woman's hands had gone thin as paper, and her eyes had gone soft, but her tongue never once dulled. "You know what you did, girl?" Mrs. Halloran said one afternoon out of nowhere, gripping Clara's hand with what strength she had left. "You never do seem to know it so. I'll tell you, since I won't get many more chances. That day you stepped off the stage. I looked at you, and I thought, there's another one. Another poor lamb Caldwell chewed up. I'd seen it before. I'd stopped letting it break my heart, because a heart can only break so many times." Her old eyes were fierce and wet. "And you were the one that turned. In 50 years in this town, you were the only one who turned around and went back at him. Everybody else he broke. They left, or they folded, or they went quiet like Margaret. You're the only one who stood in that street and decided to win." She squeezed Clara's hand. "I've buried 3 husbands, and I never had a daughter. But I had you those last years. And I want you to know that watching you win, watching you take that man apart with nothing but your own 2 hands and your own hard head, that was the best thing I ever got to see. It made my whole long life feel like it had been building up to something worth watching." Clara wept then openly the way she almost never let herself. "You gave me a room when I had $4, she said. "You gave me Margaret's name. You gave me Ferris. Every single thing I did because you pointed me at it. I didn't win anything alone." "No," the widow agreed, satisfied. "That's the other thing you learned, isn't it? That's the thing Caldwell never did. He thought a person stood alone, that's why he could throw them away one at a time. He never understood that a woman with even one person in her corner is a different animal entirely." She patted Clara's hand. "You had me, and Ethan, and that old fool Ferris finding his nerve, and a girl in Cincinnati brave enough to answer a letter. He threw away one woman. But he was never really fighting one woman. He just couldn't see the rest of you." A dry, triumphant little laugh. "Fool to the last." Mrs. Halloran died that winter in her sleep, in her own clean bed, and half the valley came to bury her, and Clara stood at the grave holding Margaret's small hand in one of hers, and the swell of a second child under the other, and she did not feel only grief. She felt the enormous, quiet gratitude of a person who has been carried, and who has learned to carry others in turn. The years turned the way years do faster than a person believes they will. The furious red baby became a furious, brilliant girl who could balance a column of figures at 7 and rope a calf at 10, and who looked at the world with her mother's clear, counting eyes. Margaret Walker grew up hearing the story not as a fairy tale, but as a true thing told plain, the way Ethan and Clara told each other true things. She grew up knowing that her mother had once been thrown away in the dust of a street, and had gotten up and had ended the man who did it. She grew up knowing the name she carried belonged first to a brave girl who never got her own life, and she grew up determined to be worth it. There were more children after her. The house that had once been a place where a lonely man only slept became a place so full of noise and life and argument and love that Ethan Walker would sometimes stand in the doorway of an evening, just as he had that first night, and look at it and shake his head like a man who could not quite believe his luck. What, Clara would say, catching him at it. Nothing. But he'd pull her in against him, this woman who'd walked into the wreck of his life and rebuilt it board by board. Just remembering. There was a stretch there before you came. I used to think this house was too big for one man and too small for a fortune I couldn't hold on to. I had it exactly backwards. It was never about the size of the house. He'd rest his chin on the top of her head. It was about who was in it. And Clara every time would think of a porch that faced the sunrise, the false promise in a false man's letter, the thing she'd once crossed a continent to get, and she'd think how strange it was that she'd ended up with something so much better than the thing she'd been lied to about. Not a porch a man had promised her. A whole life she had built board by board, choice by choice, count by count, with a man who'd never once promised her anything he didn't mean. She thought about that girl sometimes, the one who'd stepped off the stagecoach clutching a bundle of letters and a foolish, fragile hope. She didn't pity her anymore. She'd stopped pitying her a long time ago. She had come instead to love her, that frightened, hopeful, humiliated girl in the dust, because that girl had done the one thing that mattered. When the ground went out from under her, she had gotten up. She hadn't known yet how to fight, or count, or win. But she'd gotten up out of the dirt, with a whole town watching her fail, and she'd kept her chin high, and she'd made herself a cold, hard promise in a boarding house bed, and she had kept it. Everything else had grown from that. Every single thing. Inc. Clara Walker grew old on the porch of Red Valley Ranch. A real porch one Ethan built with his own hands the summer their third child was born, and yes, she'd made sure of it. It faced the sunrise. She was an old woman, the last time the story comes to rest, silver-haired and straight-backed, sitting in the evening light of the land that was hers, watching her grandchildren chase each other through the long grass by the creek that a federal judge had confirmed belonged to her family forever. Ethan was beside her, older, too slower. His big hands gone gnarled with the work of a lifetime, but his eyes still steady on her, the way they'd been steady on her in the middle of a cruel street half a lifetime before. Margaret, grown now, a woman herself, who'd taken over the valley's books from her mother and ran them with a fierceness that made the old ranchers laugh and shake their heads and say, "That's Clara's girl, all right." Margaret came and sat on the porch steps at her mother's feet, the way she had as a child, and asked the question she'd asked 100 times and always loved the answer to. "Do you ever wish it had gone the way you thought it would when you first came out here?" And Clara looked out over the valley, the creek running silver, the cattle dark on the green, the children shrieking with laughter in the grass, the whole enormous, hard-won, deeply chosen life of it. And she took her husband's old hand in hers, the way she had on a road once riding home, with a dead man's survey pressed against her heart, and a war still ahead of her. "Henry Caldwell threw me away because he thought I was worth nothing," she said. "And for one afternoon standing in that street, I almost believed him. That's the part I want you to hear, Margaret. I almost believed him." Her voice was old, but it had never lost its steel. The most dangerous lie anybody ever tells you isn't the one they tell out loud. It's the one you start telling yourself, that maybe they're right, that maybe you are nothing, that maybe you should just get on the next stage and go quietly. That's the lie that kills people, not the man, the believing. "But you didn't believe it," Margaret said. "Not really." "I chose not to," Clara said. "That's the only power any of us ever truly has, child, not what happens to us. We don't get to choose that. I didn't choose to be lied to or thrown away or left in the dust, but I chose to get up. I chose to count. I chose to fight. And I chose this." She gestured out at all of it, at the land and the water and the man beside her and the children in the grass. "Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because when I finally had every choice in the world, this was the one I wanted." She turned to look at her daughter, and her old eyes were bright. "A man once told me I wasn't the one who'd been thrown away. He told me I was the one he chose. And I loved him for it, and I still do, more than I've got words for. But I'll tell you the truest thing I know. The thing it took me a whole hard life to learn, and I want you to carry it long after I'm gone." She gripped her daughter's hand. "Being chosen is a fine thing, but it was never the point. The point, the whole point, the only point, was that in the end, I got to choose back. The sun was going down over the land that no one would ever take from them." Ethan Walker lifted his wife's hand and pressed it to his lips the way he had 10,000 evenings, and said nothing, because after all those years, there was nothing left that needed saying. And Clara Whitmore, the bride who was never wanted, the placeholder, the woman thrown away in the dust of a street, while a whole town watched her fail, sat on the porch of the life she had built with her own 2 hands and her own hard head, and her own refusal ever to stay down, and watched her grandchildren play in the last gold light on the banks of a silver creek that was theirs and theirs and theirs forever. She had not been replaced. She had not been discarded. She had been the one who got up and counted and won. And in the end, she was exactly where she had chosen, with her own 2 hands to belong. Clara thought that was the end of the story. For a long time she believed it was. She was wrong. Because there is one more thing that happened near the very end of her life that she never saw coming. And it is the truest ending of all, the one that closed the circle no one knew was still open. It came in the form of a young woman on the road. Clara was very old by then. Ethan had passed 2 winters before, quietly in his sleep in the bed they'd shared for near 50 years, his old hand still holding hers when the morning came. And though the grief of it had gone down into her like a stone, into deep water, she had not folded under it, because she was Clara Walker. And folding was the one thing she had never learned how to do. She still sat on the porch every evening. She still checked the Valley's books once a month, though Margaret ran them now, and ran them well. She was waiting, she understood, without fear and without hurry, for the same soft dark that had come for Ethan and for Mrs. Halloran before him. She'd made her peace with it. She'd made her peace with everything. And then one afternoon in early fall, a stagecoach, there were still a few. Though the railroad had come through the valley years back and made them near obsolete, a stagecoach stopped in Silver Creek, and a young woman stepped down into the street. Clara wasn't there to see it. She heard about it later, the way she'd once heard about everything, because Silver Creek still ran on talk the way it always had. But the moment she heard the shape of it, something old and deep in her chest turned over, because she knew that story. She had lived that story. The young woman had come out from the east on the strength of letters. She had a trunk and a bundle of promises and a name in her head belonging to a man who was supposed to marry her. And when the stage stopped, that man had not been waiting. He had changed his mind. He had found a better arrangement. And the young woman was standing in the middle of the street in the dust, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, and a whole town watching her come apart exactly as Clara Whitmore had stood there half a century before. History does not repeat itself. But sometimes it comes back around to see if you learned anything. Margaret was the one who brought the girl out to the ranch. Of course she was. She was Clara's daughter, and she had grown up on the story, and there was never any question in her mind what her mother would want done. She found the girl weeping outside the mercantile, being pitied by women who thought pity was the same as kindness, and Margaret Walker walked straight through the middle of them and put her arm around the girl and said, "You'll come home with me. My mother will want to meet you." The girl was called Ruth. She was younger than Clara had been, barely 20, and she was thinner and more frightened, and she'd had even less than $4 in her purse when the stage set her down. When Margaret brought her up the porch steps of Red Valley Ranch, she was shaking so hard she could barely stand, and she looked at the old woman sitting there in the evening light with the terror of a person who expects to be turned away one more time. Clara looked at her a long moment, and then she said the words. She hadn't planned them. She didn't need to. They came up out of her from a place 50 years deep. The exact words a plain, steady cowboy had once said to her in the dust of a cruel street on the worst day of her life. The words that had kept her standing when nothing else could. "That man left you standing there," Clara said gently. Ruth's face crumpled. She nodded, unable to speak. "Come here, child. Sit down." Clara patted the empty chair beside her, Ethan's chair that had sat empty 2 years and that she had let no one else use. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it plain, because I know exactly what you're feeling right now, better than anyone alive, and I'm not guessing." She took the girl's cold, shaking hands in her own old ones. "You feel like your life just ended. You feel like the whole world watched you fail, and there's nothing left. You're already thinking about the next stage east, about crawling home to whatever you left, about spending the rest of your days being the woman nobody wanted." Ruth was weeping openly now. How could you possibly—" "Because I stood in that exact street," Clara said, 50 years ago this fall, $4 in my purse, a liar's letters in my trunk, a whole town deciding I was nothing. She held the girl's eyes. "And I want to tell you the thing I wish somebody had been able to make me believe that day, though it took me years to believe it myself." Her voice went low and fierce, and absolutely certain. "This is not the end of your life, Ruth. I know it feels like it. I promise you on everything I've got, it feels like the end, and it is the exact opposite. This is the day your life stops belonging to the men who kept trying to hand it to you and starts belonging to you. The worst thing that ever happened to me happened in that street. And every good thing I have, this land, this water, my children, my whole long happy life, every bit of it grew out of that worst day. Because that was the day I stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing." Ruth stared at her tears, streaming hope and disbelief warring in her young face. "But I have nothing," she whispered. I can't even—" "You have a room here for as long as you want it," Clara said. "That part's settled, don't argue. And when you're done crying, cry as long as you need, there's no hurry. I cried the whole first night, and it did me good. When you're done, you're going to tell me what you can do, not what you hoped a man would give you. What you can do. Can you read, cipher, sew, cook, teach, tend stock? Because I have spent 50 years in this valley, learning that every single person who was ever thrown away had something in them. The person who threw them away was too blind to see. Henry Caldwell, the man who did to me what your man just did to you, he threw me away because he thought I was worth nothing." A slow, fierce smile. "I put him in prison, with my own 2 hands, because I could count, and he never once bothered to find out." Something changed in Ruth's face then. Something small and enormous. The first crack of light under a door that had slammed shut. "You put him in prison," she breathed. "I did." Clara's old eyes glinted. "Sit down, child, and I'll tell you the whole of it. It's a long story, and it's got everything in it: a liar, a cowboy, a missing girl, a forged survey, 6 days hard riding through the wild country, and a woman everybody underestimated. And when I'm done, you're going to understand something that'll carry you the rest of your life." She squeezed the girl's hands. "You're going to understand that the worst thing anybody can do to you is throw you away. And you're going to understand that it is also, if you have the nerve to get up off the ground, the first free breath you'll ever take." A plug. Ruth stayed. She had a head for teaching. It turned out a real gift for it, and within 2 years, she was running the little valley school, and within 5, she'd married not a man who'd sent for her sight unseen, but a rancher's son she'd chosen with her own clear eyes, after long enough to be sure. She named her first daughter Clara. She never once for the rest of her long life let a single soul tell her she was worth only what someone else would pay for her, and she raised her own children to know it too. And she told them the story, the true one, the way it had been told to her on a porch in the golden light by an old woman who had lived it. And that was how Clara Walker understood at the very end what her life had actually been for. She'd thought for years that the story ended with her victory with Caldwell in a cell, and the water safe, and the wedding in the little church. Then she'd thought it ended with her happiness, the children, the ranch, the long, good marriage. But sitting on that porch with young Ruth weeping, and then slowly straightening, she finally understood the shape of the whole thing, and it was bigger than her own one life. Ethan Walker had reached out his hand to a thrown-away woman in the dust of a street when he had every reason to walk on by. And that one act, that single refusal to shrug and let a person disappear, had not stopped with Clara. It had gone through her. She had reached her own hand out to Margaret Doyle and to Emmett Ferris, and to a dozen ranchers' children learning to count, and now to Ruth, and Ruth would reach hers to someone else, and on past anywhere Clara would ever see. Henry Caldwell had thrown people away one at a time, believing each one stood alone. And the answer to him, the only answer that had ever mattered, the thing that had truly beaten him, and would go on beating men like him long after they were all dust, was a hand reached down to a person in the dirt, and the words, "This is not the end of your life," passed down and down and down, like water finding its way through a valley, never stopping, never drying up, going on forever. Clara Whitmore Walker. died on her porch in the last gold light of an autumn evening, in the chair beside Ethan's empty one, with her daughter's hand in hers, and the sound of her grandchildren and Ruth's children playing together down by the creek. The creek that ran silver through land. No man would ever take the creek. She had ridden 6 days through the wild country to save the creek that was hers, and hers, and hers, and now theirs forever. She was not afraid. She had never in the end been the kind of woman who stayed afraid. Her last thought as the light went soft and gold, and the children's laughter drifted up from the water, was not of Henry Caldwell. He had not earned a place in her final moment, and she did not give him one. Her last thought was of a dusty street 50 years gone, and a plain steady cowboy taking the other handle of a trunk too heavy for her to lift, and saying quiet enough that only she could hear it, "We'll carry it together." They had. All those years, together. And now she was going to go find him and tell him that the thing they'd started in that street had never stopped, that the hand he'd reached down to her was still reaching, still lifting people up out of the dust, and always would be. The bride who was never wanted had become the woman a whole valley remembered. The placeholder had become the cornerstone. The girl they threw away had gotten up and counted and won, and built a life so full and so chosen and so wide that it went on lifting the fallen long after her own 2 hands went still. And that, not the ranch, not the water, not even the love, though the love was the heart of all of it. That was the thing Henry Caldwell had thrown away in the dust of a street, the thing he had priced at nothing, the thing he never once bothered to see coming. He had been right about one thing and one thing only. She had never been for sale. She had only ever been free.